Do we take them on the, like these yellow papers, or do we just take them in blank?
Whatever you want to do. So the essential questions really are just guiding notes. If you would like to use them, you can use them for review. They're more of a tool now for you guys to use however you want to. So use them or not use them, totally up to you. Like I said, we've already talked about this before, but we're just going to do a quick overview, so you don't need to take notes on this. It's going to be super quick. I don't know how many times I can say quick in like a 3-second period, but I've said it like a million times. So, energy flows and matter cycles. That is a very, very big idea I'd love for you guys to understand. So we talked about matter cycling. So the phosphorus cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle. So matter cannot be created or destroyed in our universe. It only gets reshaped and retooled. Energy, however, starts at one spot, so the sun, and it comes into our ecosystem. It goes into plants, animals eat plants, but eventually all energy is going to leave the system as heat. So energy flows through an ecosystem where matter continuously cycles. So because of that, oh, we got arrows. Whoa, cool. We have talked about the biogeochemical cycles. That was the very first thing we did today together. Producers. We talked about producers last time, just really quickly in our pyramid. So producers are the foundation of our food chains and our food webs. They're what take the energy from the sun and convert it into a way that we actually can use it. Because we can't take energy of the sun and like turn it into sugars or food, but plants can. So they're our producers. They are our autotrophs. Consumers are anything that does not create its own food. So animals, they are consumers. Decomposers and detrivores, these are things that break down dead or decaying things. So the trophic levels, we talked about this last time as well, but the first level is the first trophic level or the producer level. Then the second trophic level is our primary consumers. Third trophic level are our secondary consumers, and fourth trophic level are our tertiary consumers. So again, when we did our pyramid, bottom is our first level, second level, third level, fourth level as you get up to the top. So we can look at the pyramid either as a food chain, which is linear, meaning that you have one plant that is eaten by one animal, and that animal is only eaten by one other animal, and that animal is also eaten by one other animal, and there's no other interconnected relationships. Or you can look at it as a food web, which is more correct, because animals don't just eat one thing, usually. And so having more interconnections are what is going to actually support how our environment is. So I want you at your tables to look at this, and I want you to look at the backboard, and I want you guys to discuss those 3 questions. So with this food web, what would happen if an animal was taken out or an animal was added, or a plant? Which organism would be the worst to remove? So looking at all of these organisms, which would be the worst to remove. And then which would be affected more by changes, generalists or specialists? So go ahead and discuss those 3 questions. Again, they're on the backboard if you forget. And then I'll be using the popsicle sticks of destiny, and we'll be having a discussion about this. So take about 3-ish minutes and discuss those questions.
What? Looks like if one of them's removed, the whole web is on. Whatever gets eaten the most, which is.
It's like grass or grass?
That's great. Specialist probably, because they don't have anywhere else to go if they're.
This is like they can't live anywhere else to go. Or to survive, like they have to live there. Or generally they can't live anywhere.
I spent like 2 minutes searching for one that no.
So you're not reading this class next term. Did you do like a term around science credit or something?
I don't even know why I'm like in this. I like talked to my answer about it. I was thinking about her position down there.
Yeah.
She was like, oh, you don't even make this credit. I don't even know why you're there. So I don't know why.
Yeah, then if you're not going to be it, then there's no point. I mean, if you like where your grade is, like, you're good. Okay, good. anybody need more time to discuss with their table mates before we? Okay, let's do this. Okay. I gotta keep the jars right now, guys. They were so boring before. Now yours is bedazzled. So that's pretty important. All right, Tatum. So first question. You can choose if you want to do added or taken out. So what would you think would happen if an animal or plant was taken out or added? So you can choose taken out or added, whatever one suits your fancy.
If the plants were like taken out, then the animals would have like
Beautiful. So if we look at our producer level down here, if these plants were taken out, like the whole entire ecosystem would fall apart, right? There's no food down here. We're not gonna be able to support these animals, and these animals are not gonna be able to support the animals up here. Great answer. Okay, so now the next person is going to be answering what happens if an animal or plant were added. So this is Reagan. Where are you? There you are.
if something was added.
Yep, so if an animal or plant was added to the ecosystem, what would you think would happen?
I really depends if the other animals like another like animal that ate carrots, then like the rabbits would have less carrots, and then like the foxes would have less like rabbits and like stuff like that.
Absolutely beautiful. So if we added another carrot eater over here, right now rabbits have like, they're the only ones that eat carrots. There's no competition for this. But if we added somebody else who was competing for those carrots, they could out-compete the rabbits. If the rabbits are gone, the foxes, like their biggest food source, I mean they do eat birds, but rabbits are a lot bigger than birds. That would go away, which would affect the foxes. And then that would also affect the grasses, because then the grasshoppers could have more, like you said, like it would just kind of have this chain effect. Love it. Okay, so the next question is, which of the organisms would be the worst to remove? So there is no right or wrong answer as long as you defend it. I'm good with your answer. So we have Sadie. So Sadie, which organism would be the worst to remove in your opinion?
I think grains, because like brain people depend on it, not the organisms.
Love it, right? So the birds, the grasshoppers, and the mice all depend on grains. And like the grasshoppers also can eat grasses, but the mice and the birds cannot survive without grains. Love it. Okay, so I'm gonna do this again, and I want someone to think of another organism that's actually an animal. So what animal? I'm gonna give you a second to kind of think about it. Unless I've already called your name, then you're free. But if I haven't called your name, think about what animal you think would be the worst to pull out.
Second, just do it.
Ready? So it's going to be Joel.
Oh,
What animal? Don't worry, you can say I don't know yet too if it's like not
maybe the grasshopper,
cool. So grasshopper. Why do you say grasshopper?
because it feeds into. Well, actually, I changed my mind.
Okay.
I would probably say like. I don't know yet. Honestly.
Okay, cool. So you don't know yet. We'll come back to you. So the next person is going to be Darian.
And probably a grasshopper because the owl and the bird eat it, and then it eats the grass and grains.
Cool, love it. So if we look at the grasshopper really is like a central animal to this whole entire food web. So it eats grains, and it eats the grasses. So if we take the grasshopper out, these grasses are gonna get really big, and so it's gonna change like the whole entire environment there. Also, the birds and the owls, that's half of their eating, like that's half of their food. So if the grasshoppers are gone, the mice population would start to go down, which means that the grain population would change, and it would just kind of, absolutely. All right, so Joel, going back to you. You don't have to say the same answer, but why might taking an animal out, like how does that affect a food chain?
Well, because say we take the grasshopper out, like the birds eat less, which means like the foxes will eat less, and it just like it's kind of like a chain reaction where like the whole ecosystem will fall apart.
Love it. Beautiful. Okay, last question is going to be which would be affected more by changes, generalists or specialists, and why? So give me the reason why. This is going to be Graydon.
I think the specialists would be affected more because like they're less adaptable.
Love it, right? Specialists, they're either made usually by founder effect or by bottleneck effect, but they're very suited for their environment. So if their environment changes in the slightest, you have a big problem for them. Good job, guys. So this is just putting lots of random stuff in here, blah, 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 we don't care. So invasive species, they are well known for disrupting ecosystems. So if we go back to our picture of our ecosystem, imagine that we had, like Reagan said, like we had another animal come in that was eating carrots and they outcompeted for the rabbits. So now the rabbits are gone because the carrots are gone, and the foxes are gone because the rabbits are gone. And so these invasive species can topple a whole entire ecosystem by outcompeting or by eating something that never had a predator before, so it has no defenses. So an example of invasive species wreaking havoc on an ecosystem, let's look at this again, are rabbits in Australia. So humans thinking, hey, it'd be really great if we introduce rabbits into Australia so that we can hunt them. But the problem is there are no natural predators of rabbits in Australia. And so now there are millions of rabbits in Australia, and there's nothing that can be done to stop them. So rabbit plagues in Australia have occurred over several times throughout the parts of Australia since the European rabbits were introduced by European colonists. So there's actually, if you go to Australia, there's rewards for killing rabbits and like bringing their pelts in because there's just too many of them, and there's no way to stop them. So invasive species are an introduced non-native species that can cause ecological or economic impacts. So anything that doesn't belong there that shows up and starts to like weasel their way into the ecosystem, those are invasive species. So when we were doing our biodiversity lab, most of the plants actually in that golf course were invasive. So Russian olives, those are invasive species. The other main tree there were invasive species. The different weeds there are invasive species. The really tall, like dry grass that you have in Utah that when you're walking around it gets stuck in your socks, that's actually the #1 invasive species in the world. It's called cheatgrass. So invasive species are found everywhere. Invasive species, let's do another question. Do you think invasive species are generalists or specialists? We're gonna ask, Tyler's not here. Let's ask Monet. So do you think that invasive species are specialists or generalists? Okay, cool. So you don't know yet. We'll come back to you. So you're on the line. Let's see. Let's go to Liam. Where did you change your seat to? You're sitting there. There you are. Okay. So what do you think? Do you think that invasive species are more likely to be generalists or specialists?
I would say generalist, because if you put an invasive species somewhere, like they're ought to like do well anywhere if you put them there.
I love it. Yeah. So these rabbits, like, they can survive on literally any food. So it doesn't matter what food you give them. It doesn't matter what kind of plants they have. They are definitely generalists. So generalists are animals that can survive literally anywhere, and they have the ability to outcompete specialists. So Monet, hearing that, give me either another clarifying question, or in your own words, tell us which would do better, a generalist or a specialist as an invasive species.
Generous, because like you said, they can survive off of anything.
Beautiful. Love it. Nice answer. All right, so continuing on. Feedback loops. So I would love for you to start taking notes here, and we're going to watch this video. So feedback loops are actually what we've been talking about in our food chain and food webs already. We just haven't given them a name yet. So when we look at relationships, either animals can have a positive relationship or they can have a negative relationship. So a positive relationship is where one animal helps the other or one thing helps something else grow. A negative relationship is where one hurts the other. Yeah, Joel.
Are there invasive species that like go into an ecosystem but like they don't affect anything?
No. So if they don't affect me, actually, now that I think about it, it could. That could be possible. But we don't really study those ones because if they're not affecting anything, then it's hard to pinpoint that they are invasive because they're just kind of like blended into the environment. It's easier to pinpoint invasive species when they do cause a big change in the environment. So hypothetically, yes, but can't think of any right now. That's a good question. Very great question. All right, so for example, a positive feedback loop would be like a bee pollinating a flower. Like it helps the flower reproduce, and the bee also gets pollen, so that is going to be a positive feedback loop. Whereas like a fox eating a rabbit is going to be a negative feedback loop or a negative relationship because the fox is eating the rabbit. So to kind of help solidify that idea, we're going to watch this short video, and don't worry, this will stay up there for those that are taking notes.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. When you're trying to perform, feedback is an annoying obstacle. But in the grand orchestra of nature, feedback is not only beneficial, it's what makes everything work. What exactly is feedback? The key element, whether in sound, the environment, or social science, is a phenomenon called mutual causal interaction, where X affects Y, Y affects X, and so on, creating an ongoing process called a feedback loop. And the natural world is full of these mechanisms, formed by the links between living and non-living things, that build resilience by governing the way populations and food webs respond to events. When plants die, the dead material enriches the soil with humus, a stable mass of organic matter, providing moisture and nutrients for other plants to grow. The more plants grow and die, the more humus is produced, allowing even more plants to grow, and so on. This is an example of positive feedback, an essential force in the buildup of ecosystems. But it's not called positive feedback because it's beneficial. Rather, it is positive because it amplifies a particular effect or change from previous conditions. These positive or amplifying loops can also be harmful, like when removing a forest makes it vulnerable to erosion, which removes organic matter and nutrients from the earth, leaving less plants to anchor the soil and leading to more erosion. In contrast, negative feedback diminishes or counteracts changes in an ecosystem to maintain a more stable balance. Consider predators and their prey. When lynx eat snowshoe hares, they reduce their population. But this drop in the lynx's food source will soon cause their own population to decline, reducing the predation rate and allowing the hare population to increase again. The ongoing cycle creates an up and down wave-like pattern, maintaining a long-term equilibrium and allowing a food chain to persist over time. Feedback processes might seem counterintuitive because many of us are used to more predictable linear scenarios of cause and effect. For instance, it seems simple enough that spraying pesticides would help plants grow by killing pest insects, but it may trigger a host of other unexpected reactions. For example, if spraying pushes down the insect population, its predators will have less food. As their population dips, the reduced predation would allow the insect population to rise, counteracting the effects of our pesticides. Note that each feedback is the product of the links in the loop. Add one negative link, and it will reverse the feedback force entirely. And one weak link will reduce the effect of the entire feedback considerably. Lose a link, and the whole loop is broken. But this is only a simple example, since natural communities consist not of separate food chains, but networks of interactions. Feedback loops will often be indirect, occurring through longer chains. A food web containing 20 populations can generate thousands of loops of up to 20 links in length. But instead of forming a disordered cacophony, feedback loops in ecological systems play together, creating regular patterns just like multiple instruments coming together to create a complex but harmonious piece of music. Wide-ranging negative feedbacks keep the positive feedbacks in check, like drums maintaining a rhythm. You can look at the way a particular ecosystem functions within its unique habitat as representing its trademark sound. Ocean environments, dominated by predator-prey interactions and strong negative and positive loops stabilized by self-damping feedback, are powerful and loud, with many oscillations. Desert ecosystems, where the turnover of biomass is slow and the weak feedbacks loop through dead matter, are more like a constant drone. And the tropical rainforest, with its great diversity of species, high nutrient turnover, and strong feedbacks among both living and dead matter, is like a lush panoply of sounds. Despite their stabilizing effects, many of these habitats and their ecosystems develop and change over time, as do the harmonies they create. Deforestation may turn lush tropics into a barren patch, like a successful ensemble breaking up after losing its star performers. But an abandoned patch of farmland may also become a forest over time, like a garage band growing into a magnificent orchestra.
Alright, so I got here, there is a really, like a classic biology example that we talk about, and it's really easy to see. So, this right here, imagine that I am drawing this way better than I am. This is a themselves, and they're in tide pools where sea urchins are found with lots of other animals. And so these sea urchins, it's kind of weird to like figure out what makes one ecosystem healthy with sea urchin and what makes one ecosystem not healthy with sea urchins. So sea urchins are known to eat kelp. So here's my beautiful drawing of kelp. So if the sea urchin is eating kelp, do you think that's going to be a positive or a negative interaction? Negative, right? So it's eating the kelp, so that's negative. There is another animal that actually does eat sea urchins. So sea urchins are not really known for being good eating, mostly because there's a bajillion spines on them. So we have sea otters that actually love to eat sea urchins. So sea otters eating sea urchins, is that going to be a positive or a negative interaction? Negative, right? Negative interaction. But since the sea otters are eating the sea urchins, what's going to happen? What's the relationship between the sea otters and the kelp? Perfect. So it's an indirect positive because the sea otters aren't actually like physically helping the kelp, but it is positive because
They're eating the thing that's eating.
perfect. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? That's kind of what's happening here. So when we have sea otters living with sea urchins, we actually have a wide variety of other animals. So we have sea stars living with them. We have snails. We have crustaceans. And that's because sea stars and crustaceans and snails all eat sea kelp. But because of history and because humans, sea otters started to decline because sea otters were hunted for their pelts. So what's going to happen if we take sea otters out of the population? What's going to happen to our population of sea urchins?
Increase.
They're going to go up, right? It's going to get crazy high, which means what's going to happen to our kelp?
Crazy low.
It's going to go crazy low, and what's going to happen to all of these other animals that just rely on the kelp?
Crazy low.
Yeah, they're all going to die, right? They're all going to go down. So these different interactions, these different feedbacks are what create a healthy ecosystem. So sea otters right here, because their existence or their presence in an ecosystem is what creates a healthy ecosystem, we call these animals keystone species. I would love for you to write that down, keystone species. So keystone species are animals whose presence make a healthy ecosystem. Animals whose presence make a healthy ecosystem. So when we were talking about our food webs before, and I asked what would be the most detrimental organism to be taken out of a food web, there really are a ton of answers, because you could have talked about the top animal on the food chain, like a keystone species, and been like, okay, if you take this sea otter out, it's all going to fall apart. Or you could say the bottom one, the actual producers, if you take those out, it all falls apart. So there's multiple answers for that question that I asked you guys before. So looking at the interactions, we have to understand that, like we said before, energy flows through an ecosystem. So energy flows through an ecosystem by something we call primary productivity. So primary productivity is the amount of energy that plants get from the sun. So the funny thing about primary productivity is that you would think that plants harness a ton of energy from the sun, and they do. They do harness a ton. But the total amount of sunlight that is actually converted into sugars is 1%. So 99% of solar radiation is passed through without being absorbed. So it hits plants, but it's not absorbed by plants. So 99% just exits the system as heat, whereas only 1% is actually captured by plants and used in food chains and food webs after that. So if we look at primary productivity, we can look at it in one of two ways. We can look at it as gross primary productivity or net primary productivity. So if you've ever had a paycheck before and you've heard of gross pay and net pay, same exact idea. So gross primary productivity is the total amount of energy that plants actually create. And net primary productivity is how much energy is actually left over for other animals after the plant uses the energy to survive. So plants aren't altruistic. They don't just make food for other organisms for funsies. They make it for themselves. They have mitochondria, they have to do cellular respiration, and so they do use that energy, that sugar, for themselves, but there is leftover stuff, and that's how we get it. So, sorry, I just want to draw up here. I love it when kids poke their heads and they're like, oh, teacher's not going to see me. And then I stare them down. Makes me happy.
Wait, so gross primary productivity is before the animals and net primary productivity is after the animals?
Yep, gross primary productivity is the total amount of energy that the plants take in. The net primary productivity is how much energy is left over after the plant uses the energy that it needs. Is anybody still using this slide? Okay. Take a couple more seconds. Hey, Holden. All right, so for my visual learners, let me draw a picture real quick, and then we'll talk about the math. So, I like to envision a cute little flower over here. We'll give it a smiling face because it's happy. There's our flower. Here's our sun. I can spell. And then here is an ant. And it's also happy. It should be 6 legs. There we go. Anyway, so primary productivity is just talking about the amount of energy that plants get. So I would say that this is primary productivity. What the plant actually absorbs and has in its body is going to be our gross primary productivity. So that is the total amount of energy that these plants are taking in. But since plants are living, they do go through photosynthesis, but they also go through respiration. They have cells that have mitochondria and actually use energy. So let's say that the plant took in 1,000 kilocalories of energy, but it needs to use 800 kilocalories of energy. So how much energy will this ant be getting from this plant? You can just shout out the answer. 200, right? So this plant will be getting 200 kilocalories of energy. And this is your net primary productivity. So whatever is left over from the plant using the energy that it needs is going to be the net for the animals. So primary productivity is just the amount of energy that plants take from the sun. Just that promise. That procedure, I don't know what P word I was looking for. Anyways, gross primary productivity is the total amount of energy that plants actually create. Remember, plants only take about 1% of the energy from the sun. 99% of the energy from the sun is just heat. And then after the plant has used the energy that it needs, the leftover energy is what our net primary productivity is. So with that in mind, we are going to do a practice math problem. I know you're like, D-Hart, this is science. Why are we doing math? It's because math and science are best friends. So we have to do a little bit of math. So the formula you have to know is a really simple formula. Gross primary productivity minus respiration equals net. So just like we said, the amount of energy that a plant creates minus the amount of energy that the plant needs equals the amount of energy that's left over for other organisms to eat. So I would love for you to take a second and look at this word problem and do the math on your own. So give it a shot. You're welcome to work with those on your table if you need to. Alright, so I'm just gonna call somebody. Tell me what our gross primary productivity is. McKay. There you are.
0.5.
So 0.5 is actually our net. So I love that. So 0.5 is going to be our net primary productivity, or the amount of energy that is left over for the animals to use. So that I'm going to say, let's see what it's measured in. It's measured in kilocalories meters squared per year. Beautiful. Okay, so now we're looking for either our respiration or our gross. So, Emma.
Gross is 3.5.
Perfect. The gross is 3.5. So the total amount of energy that a plant is creating is 3.5. And make sure you, if you're doing this on a FRQ, make sure you put your labels with it. So you say 3.5, that could be like 3.5 chinchillas. That could be 3.5 tacos. Like, let's make sure we actually know what we're talking about. So this is per meter squared per year. So what is our respiration number? Our respiration number, Sarah. Perfect. So we are using 3 kilogram calories per meter squared per year. Perfect. So that's the math, right? Pretty simple. So if we create 3.5 and we use 3, then what's left over is 5 or 0.5. So you're not always going to see it this way. You might see respiration and net primary productivity. And so you're like, oh, so this plus this is going to equal this. Or maybe they're going to give you the gross primary productivity and they'll give you the net and you need to figure out what the respiration is. So it's basic algebra. As long as you can kind of understand this idea, you should be good. So let's do like fist to 5. 5 means I understand this math. I feel like really comfortable with it. 4 means I'm fairly comfortable with it. 3 means I'm kind of in the middle. 2, no. 1, absolutely not. Where are we filling? Okay, so sounds good. We're gonna move on. For those that gave me a 1, I'll circle around during the time that we have for like working on homework, and we'll touch base. So we're gonna skip that. We already talked about the 10% rule, right? 10% of the energy that is taken in at any level is passed on to the next level. The rest of it is being used. Talk about the energy pyramid. Perfect. Okay, so we only have a couple of small things we need to talk about in our next slides, and then we're done. So we're going to be looking at resource partitioning, and then we're going to talk about ecosystem services. Like I said, this is kind of a PC notes day, just like small things that we didn't hit in different situations. So ecosystem services talks about, resource partitioning talks about how organisms can live in the same area without competition. So we talked about competition before, right? When 2 individuals are going for the same resource, they have competition. And so you really can't have 2 individuals that solely rely on one resource in an environment, because competition will allow one to survive and one to be outcompeted. So resource partitioning is a way around that. It's instead of competing for the same resources, species can divide them. The resources used by each species are similar yet different. So here is the classic example of birds living in a tree. So this tree, or this one resource, is used by 5 different species of birds. And they all live here harmoniously. They're totally fine living here, and that's because they don't use this tree in the same exact way. So the myrtle warbler lives down here, probably living off of insects, because you know I have like ants climbing up the tree, or you have other insects at the very bottom part. You have the bay-breasted warbler that lives just in the middle right here. You have the green-throated warbler, which lives right here, the outer and the inner. So the outer on the side and outer on the side. You have the carp May warbler, which is at the very tippy top of the tree. And then you have the Blackburnian warbler that's like in this tiny section right there. So we have this one resource, but we're breaking it up into sections, and so each of these species can live there harmoniously because they're not using it for the same thing. So I like to compare this to your guys' houses. Everybody in your house has a room, even if it's a shared room, everybody has their own room, and that's what keeps the peace at your house. Could you imagine living in your house if you were all stuck in either the kitchen or the living room? Like, that would be complete chaos. Everyone using everybody's spaces and using the same exact resources at the same exact time, it just does not work out. And so just like everybody in your guys' house has a room that they can go to, they have their little section of the house that is just for them, and they can thrive there and they can do whatever they want to there. That's how resource partitioning actually works. And this is one that the AP test loves to talk about. So I'd make sure that you remember it. All right, and then the very last thing we're going to talk about today are ecosystem services. So, ecosystem services are services that the environment does that directly support our survival and quality of life. So, the ecosystem is a homie. It takes care of us. It provides things for us that if we were to try to provide for ourselves would cost millions of dollars. So just to kind of give you an idea, according to a 1997 study conducted by scientist Robert Constanza, all ecosystem services across the globe equate to about 147 quadrillion, 200 trillion, nope, that is quintillion, 200 quadrillion dollars. So like, look at all that stuff. Our ecosystem, without us tampering or making it do so, provides that much service to us. So some examples are cotton produces about $190 billion annually. Bats in Texas eat an equivalent of 66% of their body weight in insects every night, providing cotton farmer services equal to $700,000 each year. Salt marsh grasslands clear water of pollutants, providing a service that is roughly $31 per hectare per year. So the fish feed on the plants and the fish we eat from that are worth $338 per hectare per year. And then that's broken, so that's anticlimactic. So the different types of ecosystem services we have supporting services, regulating services, provisioning services, and cultural services. So I'm going to start at the very, very bottom. So supporting services are like things that ecosystem makes for us that nobody would be able to survive without. So like photosynthesis, nutrient cycling, soil formation. All of those things, nothing on this planet would survive without those things. So I like to remember that supporting services support all other things. So they're literally like the bottom support that everything needs to survive. The second service we're going to talk about are regulating services. So think about like regulations or like rules. Like you have regulations for food, so like food quality. You have regulations for water, water quality. You have regulations for air quality. So regulating things or regulating services are things that make sure that the food that we're eating and the materials we're using are up to par. So like pest and disease control would be a regulating service. Pollination or like creating the food would be a regulating service. Water purification or climate regulation, all of those are regulating services because they're taking care of or they are providing the right environment for survival. So it takes what we're given and it checks it to make sure that it's good for us. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. If you're still writing like these things down, you can also see them right here. Like it has like the information of each of them. So that slide, that graphic's gonna be on the next slide too. So the other two services, and these are the end of our notes today, are provisioning services. So if you've ever played any kind of video game, think of provisions. Or like if you're going backpacking or you're going camping, provisions that you need to survive. So shelter, food, clothing.
Then Wilcox to check out?
Absolutely. So all of those are provisioning services. So it gives you like physical things. And then last but not least, we have our cultural services. So these are services that are just for enjoyment. So like hiking or mountain biking or skiing or just looking at the mountains and being in awe of how beautiful they are, or looking at the wildflowers, or enjoying the sound of rain. All of those are cultural services that you can't really like put a price tag on, just like the enjoying of the environment. So that is the end of our notes today. I'll leave this up so you can continue to do that. But after you're done writing that down, the rest of this class period you're welcome to use to finish up your homework to make sure that it is